We off?
30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes!
Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox Carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
The #1 selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, onabotulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
TaxAct knows filing your small business taxes can be a nightmare, like the kind where you're being chased by a giant W-2 form and you're running and running, but you can never reach the submit button. Or something like that. So, TaxAct offers Expert Assist with live tax experts to make filing taxes less scary. Now, you can just have pleasant dreams about being chased by other giant, non-threatening paperwork. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
EVO. This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. Okay, let's cut right to the chase. No. Richard Ramirez didn't have juror Phyllis Singletary assassinated. Unfortunately for Miss Singletary, her fate had been approaching for quite some time due to a troubled, abusive relationship with her boyfriend. After a preliminary investigation, Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies said they were seeking for questioning a man named James Cecil Melton, 51 years old, the boyfriend who shared the apartment with the victim, Phyllis Singletary, who was 30 at the time of her death. Apparently, this is quoting Deputy Bill Wellner, apparently Singletary suffered a physical beating prior to being shot multiple times. His quote continues, "Based on the physical evidence at the location as well as witness information, we were able to more or less determine that her death was the result of a domestic dispute between her and her live-in boyfriend, James Melton. So several neighbors said they heard loud voices and then gunshots, apparently emanating from Phyllis's apartment Friday night. But no one called the police. Melton allegedly was seen speeding off in a late model gray Cadillac, and he was described by authorities as African American, 5'10", black hair and brown eyes. Singletary's body was found Monday afternoon by law enforcement officials, who went to her home in the 20,500 block of Campaign Drive after she failed to appear at 9:30 a.m. to join the other 11 jurors to deliberate the fate of defendant Richard Ramirez. Earlier in the day, court officials had tried unsuccessfully to reach her by phone. Later that same day, police, acting on a tip, were able to locate the suspect, James Melton, who had locked himself inside a friend's apartment. As police worked to gain entry, they heard a single gunshot ring out. By the time law enforcement was able to reach Mr. Melton, he had taken his own life by a single gunshot wound to the head. Judge Tynan appointed an alternate to replace Singletary, and then heard arguments from the defense that deliberations should be delayed indefinitely due to the emotional distress undoubtedly felt by the jury. That motion was denied. Welcome back to The Devil Within. You're listening to the second bonus episode of Satan's Shadow. This is The Ascent, Part 2. So we need to back up a bit here and talk about what got us to the actual jury deliberations. We know it was a grueling trial process, hundreds of witnesses, thousands of evidentiary exhibits, horrific details. And all that was leading up to the phase of the trial that no one had any control over except the jurors themselves. Eventually, it would be just those 12 citizens in a small room, eating bad food and deciding whether a fellow human being lives or dies. So, a little history on the rules that govern trial procedures here in the United States. Basically, they heavily favor the prosecution in two major ways. I mentioned last episode, opening statements are of supreme importance, but a close second is the closing statement. Now, it was determined centuries ago in Europe that the side with the burden of proof always got to go first when presenting their case, or, importantly, making the opening statement. The opening statement isn't an argument, but a detailed outline of the case explaining the evidence that will be presented to support the claim that the defendant is guilty of the charges faced. That's the first thing a jury hears, the first thing. And guess what? For the closing statements, the prosecution also goes first, but also goes last. Yeah, after the prosecution makes their closing statement or summation, the defense has their shot to make one last plea to the jurors why their guy's innocent. But then the prosecution gets to go again. They get what's called a rebuttal to respond to the defense's closing. Does the defense then get a rebuttal to the rebuttal? Of course not. So the prosecution goes first and goes last. I think we can all agree that's a little tilted toward the side of justice. And maybe it should be. I'm not judging. I'm simply pointing out what I believe to be a slightly uneven playing field. So after the marathon pretrial circus, the odyssey that was jury selection, and the 8-month trial, the case was finally in the hands of the jurors. On July 24th, 1989, deliberations began that would determine the fate of Richard Ramirez. The jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from early 20s to mid-60s. Now, the first act a jury has after being sent to deliberations is to elect a foreperson. For the Night Stalker case, that person was 43-year-old Felipe Rodriguez. The foreperson on a jury is in charge of the deliberations. They make sure everyone is heard, they make sure the evidence is reviewed in a responsible manner, and if there are any questions, it's the foreperson who communicates with the judge. And once that jury door shut, they were all business, and they would have all the time they needed. The wind changed just before dawn, curling up from the vast sea that ringed the mystical base of Mount Purgatory and brushing against the mountainside with a whisper, like ancient silk being unfurled. In the east, the first color, almost purple, not quite rose, began to stain the sky, hinting at the immeasurable promise of a world beyond sin. It was the moment between night and day, when time paused on the edge of its breath. Dante felt it first not in the air, but in his chest, in the quiet stillness of his soul, as if all that had clung to him during the long climb through penance had finally been left behind on the slopes below. Beside him, the figure of Virgil, Roman poet and guardian of reason, stood upright and silent, his eyes trained not on the summit above, but on the subtle change in Dante's posture. The pilgrim no longer leaned forward with exhaustion. He no longer sagged beneath the burden of what he had seen in hell, or what he had confessed on the terraces of Purgatory. Now he stood level with the dawn, and it was a beginning. As they left behind the Terrace of Sloth, the path steepened. Gone were the level walkways and shaded arcs. Here the earth grew raw and primordial, its jagged edges softened only by the occasional blooming of strange, high-altitude flowers that didn't seem of this world. The mountain's breath blew cool and crisp, scented with myrrh and something older, something like stone that remembered the great flood. Virgil said little, as he often did in moments that mattered most. Though he couldn't enter paradise, though his fate was forever tied to the noble shadows of limbo, he had taken Dante this far with a guide's tenderness and a scholar's care. Now he knew his time was ending. The summit loomed close. "You feel it, don't you?" Dante asked, pausing beside a rock outcrop, his breath visible in the morning chill. Virgil did not respond with words. Instead, he turned his face toward the rising sun, his expression a study in stillness. This was not the sun of Italy, though Dante might have been forgiven for believing it to be so. It was a sun untouched by sin, older than the empire Virgil once praised, and brighter than the intellect that had shaped Rome's golden age. This was the sun of divine order. And by now, they had reached the sixth terrace, the realm of the avaricious. Here, the penitents lay prostrate upon the ground, face down like fallen warriors, their bodies spread wide in surrender to the gravity of spiritual guilt. They murmured prayers that were neither frantic nor despairing, but steady, like tides against the shore. "These are the ones," Virgil said, "whose hearts clung to gold, to possessions, to the fleeting weight of earth. Now they learn that true wealth lies in release." Dante gazed at them, struck by the strange dignity in their suffering. They didn't cry out or plead. They submitted. The very dust into which they pressed their cheeks now bore the imprint of their penance. As they climbed, voices called out from beneath, examples of holy poverty, St. Nicholas giving freely, St. Lawrence martyred for treasure not his own. Every voice sang not of punishment, but transformation. They passed upward to the seventh terrace, and the light changed. The sun filtered through tall, translucent trees. There was no agony here, only yearning. The penitents here were the gluttonous, their bodies gaunt, their eyes luminous with longing. Fruit trees, eternally just out of reach, lined the path. Water shimmered, tantalizing but untouchable. Dante watched a man stretch toward a branch that receded, not cruelly, but inevitably. They fast now, Virgil said, not to torment themselves, but to train their desire. And so it was. Hunger was no longer about food, but about control, about learning again the sacred place of longing. These were not souls punished for eating. They were souls learning to feast only on what truly satisfies. A voice floated down from above. "Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness." And Dante's heart stirred. He thought of banquets in Florence, of laughter around a table, of indulgence mistaken for celebration. Now he understood the subtle slide from joy to excess. The mountain grew steep. The final terrace was near. The eighth terrace was narrower than the others. Here walked the souls of the lustful, purified not by stone or denial, but by fire. 2 walls of flame rose on either side, and the path ran between them. Within the fire, souls moved, calling out examples of chastity. Mary, Diana, the virtuous lovers whose passions bowed to honor. Dante recoiled. "I cannot pass," he whispered. "I still fear the fire." "It burns not to destroy, but to purify," Virgil said. "No soul may reach paradise without passing through it." Dante hesitated, torn between fear and longing. Then a voice rose from the flame, gentle and resolute. "Holy souls, ye pass through flame, yet do not suffer harm." And that was enough. With closed eyes, Dante stepped forward. The heat was unbearable, but sacred, not scorching the body, but searing away illusion. Desire was not the enemy. It was the misdirection of desire. Love, when rightly ordered, lifted the soul. Dante emerged trembling but whole. Virgil watched him with quiet satisfaction. "You are ready," the Roman said. They reached a stairway, and the final steps unfolded like prophecy. The path opened into the earthly paradise, a garden suspended at the summit, untouched since the fall of man. Here the sky was eternal morning. The wind carried the scent of blossoms from no known species. Trees bore fruits of every season, and birds sang in tones Dante had never known. It was Eden. Not metaphor, but a place, not lost, but guarded. 2 rivers flowed here, one to wash away the memory of sin, and one to restore the memory of virtue. And Dante wept, not from sorrow, but from recognition. He had arrived not only at the end of Purgatory, but at the beginning of his own truest self. And then he saw her. Across the river stood Beatrice, clothed in white, adorned with olive and laurel, radiant with an otherworldly light. Her gaze, steady and sorrowful, met his with a love both fierce and unflinching. Dante fell to his knees. "You were the light of my youth," he whispered, "the spark that pulled me from darkness." Beatrice didn't smile. Her beauty was not gentle. It was exacting. "You strayed," she said. "You loved shadows and called them light. But grace has brought you here." She beckoned him to rise. "Drink," she said, gesturing to the first river. And as he drank, the weight of sin fell from him like autumn leaves. Then she motioned to the second river. And as he drank, he remembered every good deed he had ever done, every moment that he had loved rightly, every gesture of mercy and truth. Then Beatrice drew near and said, "Now you are ready for the stars." Beside them, Virgil faded into mist, his task complete. His poetry, which had carried Dante from despair to discipline, gave way now to revelation. And overhead the sky shifted, the constellations turned, not in fate, but in freedom. The journey through hell had taught Dante the depth of sin. Purgatory had shown him the possibility of ascent. Now, with Beatrice at his side, he turned his face toward heaven, and the stars began to sing. Above them, the morning was no longer tentative. It had blossomed fully. The sun, a full and holy fire, burned at the zenith, not to sear, but to crown. And somewhere beyond even that, beyond the veil of human knowledge and poetic invention, lay paradise. But for now, Dante stood at the summit, barefoot in Eden, forgiven and unburdened. Around him, the trees whispered of beginnings, and the river sang of things too beautiful for speech. And high above, past the edge of sight, those stars waited, not as distant fires in the sky, but as the very pattern of divine order that had guided him from a dark, forbidding wood to the foot of heaven. Just like a predator will go after the slowest and weakest prey, a hacker will target people with the weakest security. And if you're not using ExpressVPN, that's you. Just think about all the times you log into an unencrypted network every week. Man, every day. In restaurants, coffee shops, hotels, any hacker who happens to be on that same network can steal your personal data. Your passwords, your bank logins, your credit card details, yeah, all of it. ExpressVPN stops hackers from gaining access by creating a secure, encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet. It's easy to use. You just fire up the app and click one button. And it would take a hacker with a supercomputer more than 1 billion years to get past ExpressVPN's encryption. My little brother works in cybersecurity, and as soon as I left my old podcast network and went off on my own, the first thing he said was, "Bro, get a VPN. Protect your business. Protect your data." I never thought about security until I had something to lose. Don't make that mistake. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/devilwithin. That's expressvpn.com/devilwithin to find out how you can get up to 4 extra months free. expressvpn.com/devilwithin.
Today, the beverage aisle looks a lot different than it used to. America's beverage companies are working together. We're delivering the options everyone wants. In fact, nearly 60% of beverages Americans buy have zero sugar. You'll find more variety than ever, including more of your favorites, now available with zero sugar. You'll also find more sizes and clear calorie information on the front of every can, bottle, and pack. We know when it comes to finding balance, the more choices, the better.
Season 1 of Andor had critics calling it the best Star Wars series yet. Now, Season 2 of the Emmy-nominated series returns April 22nd. Follow Cassian Andor as he embarks on a path from a rebel to a hero. Starring Diego Luna and from creator Tony Gilroy, writer of Michael Clayton and The Bourne Identity. Season 2 of Andor is streaming April 22nd, only on Disney+.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
So before we get to the verdict and sentencing phase of the Night Stalker trial, there's something interesting I wanted to bring up. Throughout the pretrial, trial, deliberation, and sentencing, a phenomenon was quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, making itself uncomfortably known inside and outside the courtroom. It's called hybristophilia. Hybristophilia is defined as a sexual interest and attraction to those who commit crimes. Basically, there were lots of young women who apparently found themselves hopelessly attracted to Ramirez, and they showed up every day to make sure he and everyone else knew it. Now, while this condition might seem perplexing or sensational at first glance, it actually reveals complex intersections between psychology, power, fantasy, and emotional vulnerability. The term comes from the Greek words hubrisine, which means to commit an outrage, and philos, which means having a strong affinity or love for. In common discussions, hybristophilia is often referred to as the Bonnie and Clyde syndrome, referencing the infamous criminal couple and the romanticism surrounding their violent spree. And it's not just Ramirez. Ted Bundy had female admirers, and more recently Chris Watts, the monster who killed his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters, then dumped their bodies into crude oil tanks. Yeah, that guy has female admirers. So there are 2 generally accepted types of hybristophilia. The more passive form involves attraction to criminals from a distance, writing letters, fantasizing, or admiring them without any desire to participate in their crimes. The more active form, however, includes individuals who are not only attracted to criminals, but also wish to be a part of their criminal acts, sometimes even helping them commit crimes. Notably, some women have aided violent offenders in escaping prison or committing further crimes, driven by emotional or sexual attachment. Although fictional, the relationship between the Joker and Harley Quinn comes to mind. Psychologists have proposed several theories to explain hybristophilia. One explanation lies in the concept of, quote, rescue fantasies. Some individuals believe that they can save or redeem the criminal through love, seeing the offender not just as a murderer, but as a misunderstood person who needs compassion. This savior complex can be especially strong in people with histories of trauma or low self-esteem, where the fantasy of being loved by someone dangerous offers a sense of importance, control, or self-worth. Another factor is the allure of power and rebellion. For some, violent criminals symbolize strength, defiance, and dominance, qualities that can be magnetically attractive, especially to individuals who feel powerless in their own lives. The criminal, in this context, becomes a symbol of primal masculinity, or raw freedom. There's also a cultural element. Media often romanticizes outlaws, portraying them as tortured souls, misunderstood anti-heroes, or just plain old tragic figures. This glamorization can blur the line between fact and fantasy, making it easier for someone to fall into idealized narratives about people who have committed horrible crimes. Now, it's important to note that hybristophilia is not recognized as a formal mental disorder in diagnostic manuals. Instead, it's considered what's called a paraphilia, an atypical sexual interest, which may or may not interfere with one's life or relationships. Not everyone attracted to criminals has hybristophilia in a clinical sense. And many people who correspond with inmates do so out of curiosity or maybe activism or even compassion without sexual motivation. So hybristophilia is a fascinating and kind of troubling reflection of how human psychology can be drawn to danger or dominance, or even the idea of redemption. And in the case of Richard Ramirez, one specific hybristophiliac would take it to the next level. So, on September 20th, 1989, after 22 days of deliberations, a juror's murder, and several attempts by the defense to have a mistrial declared, Judge Tynan was notified that the jury had reached a verdict.
Murderous devil worshiper or an innocent victim of mistaken identity. A Southern California jury in the so-called Night Stalker case reached its verdict today. David Dow reports.
With the jury in the above entitled action find the defendant, Richard Ramirez, guilty of murder.
It took the jury 22 days to find Richard Ramirez guilty of all 13 murders and 30 related felonies he was charged with. Ramirez declined to be present for the verdict. Thus ended the year-long trial of the Texas drifter accused of being the Night Stalker, the serial killer who once terrorized Southern California.
Yeah, he was found guilty on all charges, 43 crimes in total. As stated, including 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 counts of sexual assault, and 14 counts of burglary. Several of the jurors gave statements immediately following the reading of the verdict, and one was quoted as saying, "We saw evil in its purest form. There was no doubt in our minds." Another commented on how the trial affected her personally. Quote, "There were nights I couldn't sleep. I'd hear testimony in my dreams, but we couldn't let fear keep us from justice." And Deputy District Attorney Phil Halpin, when he could maybe have been forgiven if he took a short victory lap, instead maintained his measured, thoughtful demeanor. His only quote was, "These things are not contests. It hasn't been fun." In 1985, he was named one of the state's most effective prosecutors in the California Lawyer magazine. He retired on March 2, 2001, after nearly 37 years of service. Halpin passed away from cancer on July 25, 2003, which happened to be his 65th birthday, at a hospice in Bend, Oregon. He is survived by his 2 daughters, Deborah Loftus and Sydney Halpin. As for Halpin's boss, Gil Garcetti, well, his leadership during this time helped reinforce not only his reputation as a skilled prosecutor, but as a highly effective leader, contributing to his later election as the LA County District Attorney in 1992. But that wasn't the end of it, not just yet. The jury would return 2 weeks later, on October 4th, 1989, to begin what's known as the penalty phase. Basically, another trial-like proceeding that would determine either life in prison or the death penalty for Richard Ramirez. So this is where the prosecution calls upon survivors and family members to make what's known as impact statements, testimonials in open court as to how the actions of the convicted, in this case Ramirez, has had a lasting and indelible impact on their lives. The pain of missing a loved one, the lost time with family, the mental anguish, or the pain and suffering endured by the survivors of attacks by Ramirez. All this was presented to the judge and jury, again, masterfully by Phil Halpin. The defense would have their say in an attempt to save the life of their client, but it seemed to everyone present that they were actually resigned to the fact that there was no saving Richard Ramirez. They didn't call any mental health experts, no one to offer any clinical reason that Ramirez might not have been capable of stopping himself, no one to explain his complete lack of remorse. They just surrendered. And so, as expected, on November 7th, 1989,
it is the judgment and sentence of this court that Richard Ramirez shall suffer the death penalty. This penalty is to be inflicted within the walls of the state prison in San Quentin, California.
But just before he was led away from the courthouse for the last time, Ramirez had a few words for all of us.
You don't understand me. You are not expected to. You are not capable of it. I am beyond your experience. I am beyond good and evil. Legions of the night, night breed. Repeat not the errors of Nightcrawler and show no mercy. I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells within us all. That's it. Big deal. That's always went with the territories. I'll see you in Disneyland.
Disneyland decided to not use that in one of their commercials. Thanks for listening. Next week on The Devil Within, Satan's Shadow, we explore Ramirez's life in prison, the lasting effects of his murder spree on the city of Los Angeles, and the woman he married. Oh yeah, Ramirez had himself a jailhouse wedding. Plus, Dante finally makes it to paradise. That's next week on The Devil Within, Satan's Shadow. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your host, Brandon Morgan.